page one, which is a documentary about Year in the Life of the New York Times, which takes the specific, this is from a year or so ago now, because this is the thing with all documentaries, is obviously if you're making a documentary about a newspaper, by the time you get to see the documentary, obviously the news headlines will have moved on. So this was done before the phone hacking scandal, before the new editor came in, before. So it is to some extent out of date already, but that's just in the nature of the beast. It takes the specific allegation that the New York Times was about to go under, which it wasn't, as a way of debating whether or not newspapers have a future, or whether the future is entirely electronic. The central thesis of it being, if in a world in which the New York Times doesn't exist, in a world without the New York Times, what is the role of the newspaper? And
what is the role of the newspaper?
Well, the whole premise is that the world is not without the New York Times. I mean, there's, as you know, the idea at the moment is that all newspapers are suffering terribly, that the future is digital. You see how I did that?
Nicely educated.
And that, in fact, newspapers are somehow, behemoths and dinosaurs, and they won't be able to survive in the digital era, and that will, and that's just the way everything's going. In fact, there was one point when they have footage from a conference which is called something like Armageddon, the world without, which is asking, what will you do when the New York Times goes, as opposed to if the New York Times goes. And they've got very open access to the editorial floor of the New York Times. I mean, it's a film about what, if you're interested in newspapers, it is fascinating, partly just to see a newspaper running around. I don't know whether you were ever, for example, a great fan of All the President's Men. See, I love all that stuff. I love the thing about people in desks typing and making phone calls and then hold the front page and all that sort of stuff. What they've got here is in the shape of David Carr, who's this kind of very gravel-voiced character who has become their media reporter through a very sort of complicated series of events. And he's actually become somebody who's taking the argument about the importance of proper news reporting out and having effectively, hand-to-hand vocal fights with people who are saying that the whole future is digital. One of the things that he does rather beautifully is, in part of this conference about what will you do in a world in which there aren't newspapers, he holds up a thing which is the front page, which is a screen grab from a news site. It's called something like Newser, and basically what it has is it takes all the news stories from everywhere else and puts them in a sort of top 10. He says this is what it looks like, this is the future, it's digital. Once all the newspapers have gone, this is what it'll look like, and he holds up a thing with a whole bunch of holes in it. The point that he's making is that the internet news feeding frenzy only exists because at ground level there are newspapers with proper rules and proper journalists and proper reporting doing the old-fashioned business of newspaper working. Now, obviously, there have been some characters within this story who haven't, in fact, turned out to be the great journalists they ought to have been, and this has knocked a hole to some extent in in people's confidence in old-style newspaper reporting. But at least in this kind of case, there are standards below which to fall. In the case of the internet, it is much more unregulated. And what the film is saying, broadly speaking, is that it may be true that the future is indeed the digital revolution, but the bedrock of news reporting is news reporting, and it doesn't matter what the media is. There's a lovely moment in it in which this Carl character, who at the beginning is sort of introduced to you as a sort of technophobe, somebody who doesn't do Twitter, but during the course of the movie actually does do Twitter and decides that it's a good thing, is shown a then new iPad. You remember how happy you were when you got your first iPad? And you queued up to like 12 o'clock at night. You were like a little kid who just got his first train set. And he says a lovely thing.
You get applauded when you walk out of the shop.
Very good, yes. That's what, in fact, they've got footage of people being applauded, but they've got a lovely thing of him going, and he says, I like it. You know why I like it? Because it reminds me of a newspaper. I think the thing that I liked about this film is that it seems to me that the director's attitude, Andrew Rossi, his attitude towards the news press, to what's now referred to as analogue, news reporting, is very similar to my feelings about celluloid, which is, in the end, you know that the new age has arrived. You know that the future is digital in both mediums, but you also understand that there is something crucial about the way in which the analogue medium, celluloid, was managed that you must not lose as you pass into the new age. And in fact, I think, interestingly enough, one of the things about this story is it does quite a good job of saying, look, the future has arrived. The future is online. That's the way everything's going. But you can't just simply dispense with the past and pretend that everything else is dinosaur technology. It's not.